What happens when a woman spends her entire life protecting her family, only to be told the day before her sister's wedding that the perfect gift would be her disappearance? The real betrayal isn't just the cruel words. It's the years of quiet manipulation, buried jealousy, and a man standing behind the scenes turning love into leverage and trust into a financial trap. They say, what you allow will continue. But when silence only feeds, deception, does staying quiet protect the family or destroy it? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to her from the heart. The day before my sister's wedding, Charlotte felt too bright. It was late October, that thin edge of fall where the air turns sharp, but the sun still refuses to fade early. I drove from uptown after work, still in my navy blazer laptop bag, sliding against the back seat every time I braked. I remember glancing at myself in the rearview mirror at a red light lipstick, still intact posture, straight face calm. I looked like a woman who had her life together. I told myself I was driving there for one last sister moment before everything changed. Maris's house sat in a quiet cul-de-sac outside the city-trimmed hedges, white siding pumpkins staged perfectly by the porch. It looked like a catalog version of stability. I parked, smoothed my jacket, and walked inside without knocking. The smell hit first hairspray, fresh-cut flowers, something sweet and artificial. Garment bags hung from curtain rods, bridesmaid dresses draped across the couch. Boxes of centerpieces crowded the kitchen island. It looked like the set of a romantic comedy right before the happy ending. But the air felt tight. Voices carried down the hallway laughter that didn't quite reach the walls. I followed the sound into the master bedroom. Maris stood in front of the mirror wearing the structured bodice of her wedding gown. The skirt pooled at her feet like white water. Her hair was pinned halfway up, loose curls tumbling down her back. For a second, I saw my sister at 8 years old spinning in Mom's old lace curtains, pretending they were wedding dresses. Callum stood behind her, not touching her, just close enough to feel present, like a shadow that had learned how to smile. "You're early," he said, tone light, but edged. "I got off work sooner than I thought," I replied. I stepped forward automatically. That's what I've always done. Adjust, fix, smooth. I reached for the seam near Maris's waist where the fabric pulled slightly. "Hold still," I murmured, instinctively adjusting the lining. "It's just catching." I didn't notice at first that she was watching me in the mirror, not with affection, not with irritation, just something unreadable. Then she smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just deliberate. "You know what would be the perfect gift," she said lightly, as if she were commenting on table linens. I glanced up at her reflection. "You disappearing from our lives forever." It didn't land like a slap. It landed like ice. Something cold slid down my spine, not because the words were dramatic, but because I knew she had rehearsed them. They were too clean, too precise. Callum chuckled softly behind her. "Maris," he said in that soothing tone he uses when he wants to appear reasonable. Then he looked at me. "She's stressed. You know how she gets. This is her weekend. Maybe don't make it harder than it has to be. Make it harder." I felt my fingers still on the fabric. "Did you mean that I asked her? Not him." Callum opened his mouth again, but I held up my hand without looking at him. "I didn't ask you." Maris didn't break eye contact in the mirror. "Yes," she said. No hesitation, no wobble. "I'm tired, Sable. I'm tired of feeling like you're always hovering, always correcting, always there." The room felt smaller. "I'm here because I love you," I said quietly. She exhaled, almost bored. "It doesn't feel like love. It feels like control." Callum stepped closer to her, now resting his hands on her shoulders. Protective. Territorial. "You do have a tendency to overreact," he added smoothly. "This is supposed to be a happy time. Overreact." I thought about all the times I'd stepped in quietly over the years, the bills I covered without announcement, the things I fixed without credit. The silence I chose instead of confrontation. I looked at Maris again. I want to hear you say it without him speaking for you. I said calmly, "Do you want me gone?" She didn't blink. Yes. No apology. No softness. Just yes. Something inside me shifted, and for the first time in my life, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't remind her of what we'd survived. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to win. I stepped back, smoothed my blazer, and nodded once. "Okay," I said. Callum looked faintly surprised. I think he expected a scene. Instead, I walked out. The front door closed behind me with a soft click. The evening air felt cooler than before. I got into my car, hands steady on the wheel. I didn't turn on the radio. I drove home in silence. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Charlotte, the sky had turned indigo. My house was dark and quiet. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and opened my laptop out of habit. There was an email from Andrea Pike, my real estate attorney. Subject line routine property review. I almost ignored it, but I opened it. Andrea had attached updated documentation for the Wilmington condo annual review title confirmation tax records. I scanned the PDF casually at first. Owner Sable Rowan, sole owner, no secondary name, no transfer, no pending change. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Maris had been telling people it was her wedding gift, that it was basically hers already. She talked about renovations like they were personal projects. Callum had mentioned refinancing possibilities in passing once or twice, but legally it was still mine, fully mine. Then I noticed a note in Andrea's email. There had been a recent property inquiry. Someone had requested preliminary information about potential lien structuring or credit leverage tied to the unit. Nothing finalized, just an inquiry. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. Someone had been exploring options, and they hadn't called me. I closed my laptop and stared at the kitchen wall. If my sister wanted me erased, if the perfect gift was my disappearance, then I would disappear. Just not the way she expected. I leaned back in my chair and whispered into the quiet house. "If you want me gone, Mary's, I'll be gone in a way you'll never forget." Grief changes the shape of a family. I was 17 when our parents died. Winter, black ice, a highway outside Raleigh, a state trooper at the door. Maris was 20, old enough to sign papers, too young to understand what she was signing away. Everyone told her she was strong, responsible, brave. Teachers praised her. Church ladies hugged her. Neighbors brought casseroles and said, "Your sister is lucky to have you." I was the quiet one standing behind her at the funeral, nodding when people said sorry. But I remember the kitchen after the last visitor left. The house silent. The dishes stacked in the sink. Maris standing at the counter, staring at nothing. She didn't cry. She just said without looking at me, "I had plans, you know." I didn't know what to say. So I decided I would never become another burden. I cooked dinner. I cleaned. I studied until my eyes burned. I got a part-time job at a grocery store before I even had a driver's license. I folded my own grief into small, manageable shapes. I told myself if I made things easier, she wouldn't resent me. But resentment doesn't disappear just because someone tries harder. It settles. After college, when I finally had a stable job in Charlotte, I found the condo in Wilmington. It had been Mom's last investment, small, near the water, outdated but solid. I poured 2 years into that place. Weekends sanding cabinets, evenings painting walls, installing backsplash tile with YouTube tutorials running on my phone. I scrubbed floors until my hands cracked. I saved every bonus check to upgrade fixtures. It wasn't about property value. It was about building something that felt like ours again. When I handed Maris the keys, I remember how she cried. Real tears. She hugged me so tightly my ribs hurt. "No one loves me like you do," she said into my shoulder. I kept that sentence like a receipt, proof that I wasn't invisible. But Andrea's email shattered the illusion that everything around that condo was simple. A recent property inquiry. Someone testing leverage. I thought about the last few months, Maris borrowing money just to cover deposits, Callum deflecting questions about wedding costs, the way he'd once casually asked whether I'd considered optimizing the condo's equity. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Now it felt different. The rehearsal dinner was held at a lakeside restaurant on Lake Norman. Soft amber lights, string lights across the patio, the kind of place that photographs beautifully. I arrived alone. Maris wore a pale blue dress hair loose over her shoulders. She looked radiant in that curated way people look when they've invested thousands into a moment. But she kept touching her abdomen, small, nervous gestures. Her eyes flicked toward Callum before answering even simple questions. I watched. That's what I do best. At one point, I stepped away toward the bar for water. 2 bridesmaids stood nearby, whispering, "Heard something happened in Ohio." One murmured, "Yeah, some woman named Blaine, or no, Blaine's the friend. I don't know. It was messy. Ohio. Blaine." The name lodged in my chest. Months earlier, a woman had come to my office downtown asking for Callum. I remember because she didn't look like someone attending a social visit. She looked tense, focused. She'd left after making a phone call in the lobby. I hadn't connected it then. Now I did. I turned slightly, pretending to check my phone. He changes stories. One bridesmaid continued softly, but Maris doesn't want to hear it. Doesn't want to hear it. I looked across the patio at my sister. She laughed at something Callum said, but the laugh was too sharp, too quick. He rested his hand on her lower back possessively. A pattern began forming in my mind, not just emotional manipulation, but financial positioning. What if the condo wasn't just symbolic? What if it was collateral? I considered confronting her that night, pulling her aside, telling her everything, but I knew my sister. If I accused him without undeniable proof, I would become the villain of her love story, and Callum would make sure of it. So I stayed quiet. But this time, my silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Back home that night, I sat in the dark living room and stared at my phone for a long time before dialing. Jude Hallbrook answered on the second ring. We'd worked together once on an internal investigation at my company corporate fraud, messy but contained. He was precise, calm, thorough. "I need help," I said, with what he asked, with something that might already be too late. There was a pause. "Send me everything you have," he said. As I hung up, I realized something had changed inside me. If I had to disappear from my sister's life, I would disappear from the role she'd assigned me first, the fixer, the quiet one, the girl who absorbs the damage. And for the first time, I understood that silence doesn't protect love. Sometimes it protects the wrong person. I met Jude Hallbrook at a brick-walled coffee shop in Charlotte just after sunrise. It was the kind of place that smelled like roasted beans and quiet ambition still half empty before the morning rush. A few remote workers hunched over laptops. A barista polished cups behind the counter. Outside, the city hadn't fully woken up yet. Jude was already there when I walked in. He didn't wave. He just looked up, once nodded, and slid a legal pad slightly to the side to make room for me. He wore a charcoal jacket and the same neutral expression I remembered from our last case together. He didn't do sympathy. He did facts. I sat down across from him and placed my phone and a printed copy of Andrea's email on the table. "Start from the beginning," he said. So I did. I told him about the condo, about the recent property inquiry, about the rehearsal dinner, about the name Blaine, about the woman who'd once come to my office asking for Callum and left after a tense phone call in the lobby. Jude didn't interrupt. He didn't frown. He didn't reassure me. He just wrote. When I finished, he tapped the pen against the pad once. "Give me his full name," he said. "Callum Voss." He typed something into his laptop fingers, moving steadily. It didn't take long. "He hasn't always used that name," Jude said. I felt something tighten in my chest. "What do you mean? In the last 10 years, he's used at least 2 surnames. Same first name. Different last names in different filings." He turned the screen slightly toward me. There were public civil complaints, small, scattered across states, Ohio, Michigan. The language was dry and legal, but the pattern wasn't. Failed investments, funds transferred, promises made, communication cut off. 2 names appeared more than once in the documentation: Renee Caldwell and Miles Ketter. They both filed civil complaints, Jude said. Neither one recovered their full losses. I stared at the screen. Did he go to jail? No criminal conviction tied to those cases. Civil disputes, settlements, withdrawals. He paused. Or people too tired to keep fighting. I swallowed. So he walks away clean, I said quietly. Jude didn't answer that. Instead, he clicked to another document. This is more recent, he said. Wilmington. My pulse slowed in a strange, steady way. There it was. A draft file initiated at a bank in Wilmington. Preliminary paperwork for a line of credit. Collateral listed the condo. Owner Sable Rowan. Proposed co-signer Maurice Rowan. The file was incomplete. No final signatures. But there was an internal note attached to the inquiry. Fiancé will assume responsibility post-marriage. I stared at that sentence. It felt clinical, efficient, casual, as if my sister's life had been reduced to a line item in a strategy. If she signs after the wedding, I said slowly, and they merge accounts, the liability can be structured cleanly, Jude finished, especially if the marriage provides financial consolidation. I leaned back in my chair. Callum hadn't needed ownership. He needed proximity, access, a signature at the right moment. And if the condo stays in my name, I asked, then he can't complete this without you, Jude said, unless he finds another angle. Another angle. My mind moved quickly now. Maris borrowing money for deposits. Maris saying she'd handle the details. Callum casually asking me once whether I'd considered leveraging the condo's equity for smarter returns. He'd been mapping it out. Jude closed the laptop and slid a small USB drive across the table. Everything I've found so far is on here, he said. Copies of the filings, contact logs tied to his previous cases, and something else. He tapped the drive once. Callum's communications with a woman named Blaine Mercer. Not romantic messages. Financial, coordinating transfers, addresses, phone numbers. So she's not just I stopped. Not just anything Jude said. She's involved. I looked down at the USB drive in my hand. If I walked into the wedding rehearsal and accused Callum with this, what would happen? I could already hear it. She's jealous. She's dramatic. She can't stand that her sister's happy. Callum would play wounded. Maris would defend him. The narrative would shift before I could finish a sentence. I looked up at Jude. If I speak before the wedding, I said, I lose. You don't have enough proof yet to win cleanly, he replied, and he knows how to redirect. I nodded slowly. The truth couldn't be whispered in a hallway. It had to be undeniable. In front of witnesses, in a place where he couldn't spin it into a family feud. I pulled out my phone. Andrea answered on the second ring. I need to sell the Wilmington condo, I said. There was a pause. Now, yes. Fast. Cash offer if possible. It won't get you the best price. I'm not selling for the price. I ended the call and sat there for a moment staring at the condensation sliding down my coffee cup. If Maris wanted me gone, I would be gone from the equation he'd built. I wouldn't stand at the altar and scream. I wouldn't beg her to see. I would remove the trap. I looked back at Jude. I'm not trying to ruin her wedding, I said quietly. No, he said. I'm clearing the ground before she steps into it. The morning after I met Jude, my house felt unusually quiet. I woke before my alarm. The sky outside my bedroom window was still gray-blue. For a few seconds, I lay there listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint traffic in the distance. Then I remembered. I reached for my phone. An email from Andrea had arrived at 6:12 a.m. Cash offer received. Investor. Clean funds. Quick close possible within 48 hours. I stared at the number. It was fair. Not exceptional. But enough. Andrea called minutes later. This is fast, she said. Are you certain? Yes. You don't want to negotiate. No. There was a pause on the line. All right, she said. We'll move forward. You'll need to sign electronically today. After I hung up, I opened the digital documents on my laptop. The cursor blinked over my name. Seller Sable Rowan. I signed. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like severing a nerve. That condo wasn't just property. It was every weekend I'd driven down to Wilmington with paint cans in the trunk. Every blister from installing tile myself. Every late-night phone call to contractors because I refused to cut corners. It was the only thing that had ever felt like proof that I could build something solid after everything fell apart. And now I was letting it go. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. By noon, I was on the highway heading toward Wilmington. The drive felt longer than usual. Trees along the road flashed by in muted autumn colors. My thoughts moved in sharp, clear lines. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it to remove leverage. When I unlocked the condo door for what might be the last time the air inside was still, it smelled faintly of salt and cleaning solution. The hallway echoed when I stepped in. It was emptier than I remembered. The framed photos were gone. The throw pillows Maris had chosen last spring were missing. Even the small ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter had disappeared. She'd been preparing to move, preparing for a life with him. I walked through each room slowly. The bedroom closet stood half open. A few hangers remained swinging slightly from the air conditioning vent. In the kitchen, I opened drawers absent-mindedly. In the back of one drawer, tucked beneath old instruction manuals, I found a photocopied bank form. Faded, crooked, not complete. But at the bottom of the page was Maris's signature, slanted, rushed. It wasn't the full document, but it was enough to show she had signed something, more than something. She had been participating. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. Had she known, or had she trusted him completely? My phone rang. Andrea again. "There's one more thing," she said. The bank confirmed there was an inquiry about adding spousal liability to the property file. I went still. "Who initiated it?" I asked. "Callum Voss. Not Maris, not me. Him. He'd been moving pieces ahead of us, testing doors, seeing which ones were unlocked. "When was this?" I asked. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. 2 weeks before the wedding. 2 weeks before my sister smiled and asked me to disappear. I thanked Andrea and ended the call. I stood alone in the kitchen of the condo I had rebuilt with my own hands. Callum had been steps ahead, but he hadn't known one thing. He hadn't known I would stop playing the quiet role. By late afternoon, the closing was finalized. The condo officially transferred, funds wired, clean, legal, irreversible. I sat in my car outside the building and checked my bank app. The number had changed. The property was gone. The thing Maris believed was her wedding gift had vanished before she even walked down the aisle. I didn't smile. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt steady. If Callum intended to use that condo as a chain, he had just lost the most important link, and he had no idea yet. The morning of the wedding arrived clear and sharp, the kind of blue North Carolina sky that looks almost staged. Asheville sat wrapped in mountains, the lake beside the resort, smooth as glass. From a distance, the lodge looked peaceful, almost sacred. No one driving up that gravel path would have guessed what was waiting inside. I arrived early. Too early for most guests, but not early enough to feel calm. The air carried a thin chill brushing against my bare arms as I stepped out of my car. I carried a leather tote over my shoulder. Inside it were 2 things that felt heavier than they looked the USB Jude had prepared, and a stack of neatly printed summaries, clean, organized, factual. No accusations, no emotional language, just records dates, filings names. Facts don't scream, they stand still. I walked through the lobby past a stone fireplace and a wall of windows overlooking the lake. Wedding planners rushed by with clipboards. Florists adjusted centerpieces in the hallway. Everything moved with rehearsed precision. I found the bridal suite down a long corridor carpeted in muted cream. The door was half open. I knocked once and stepped inside. Maris sat in front of a large mirror wrapped in a silk robe, her hair pinned halfway up, while a stylist worked carefully around her. The room smelled of powder and perfume and champagne. She looked beautiful. Her shoulders, though, were rigid, her breathing shallow. The wedding planner stood nearby reviewing a printed timeline. Maris held a pen and signed off on final confirmations. Her hand trembled slightly as she initialed one line. I noticed everything. That's what I've always done. I walked toward the small table near the window and picked up a bottle of water. I crossed the room and held it out to her. You should drink something, I said quietly. She didn't look at me. She brushed my hand aside. I'm fine, she said. Just stand over there, okay? I don't need commentary today. It didn't sting the way it once would have. It didn't break anything. It simply confirmed something I already knew. She had chosen her side. I stepped back and stood near the wall, watching her reflection in the mirror, watching how often her eyes flicked to the doorway searching for him. After a few minutes, I slipped out into the hallway. I told myself I just needed air. The corridor was quiet, sunlight spilling through narrow windows. I walked slowly, letting the cool air settle my thoughts. That's when I heard his voice. Callum stood near the end of the hall, partially hidden by a decorative column phone pressed to his ear. His tone was low but confident. Yeah, he said. Once we're past the ceremony, it's done. He paused, listening. After the accounts are consolidated, everything falls into place. Another pause. I know. Just wait for the signal after the reception. He glanced around briefly. Tell Blaine to hold tight. The name echoed in my chest. Blaine. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. His expression smoothed instantly like nothing had happened. I stayed where I was, heart steady. Blaine wasn't just someone from his past. She wasn't a rumor. She was operational. If accounts were consolidated after the wedding signatures could align, funds could move, paper trails could blur under the protection of marriage. He wasn't planning romance. He was finalizing a transaction. The ceremony took place outdoors by the lake. White chairs lined the aisle. A wooden arch framed the water behind it. The mountains rose quiet and indifferent in the distance. I sat in the second row. Maris walked down the aisle, radiant veil catching the light. For a brief, aching moment, she looked like my sister again, the girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street, the one who signed guardianship papers because no one else would. Callum waited at the altar, smiling like a man who had calculated everything. As the officiant spoke about love and partnership, my mind split in two. One part of me wanted to stand up, interrupt, expose him right there under open sky, but I could already see how that would unfold. Public meltdown, emotional sister, jealous sabotage. He would hold her hands, look wounded, and the story would become about me. No. The truth had to land where it couldn't be spun. I stayed seated. They exchanged vows. They said I do. Applause rose around us like nothing was wrong. My phone vibrated once in my lap. A message from Jude. Everyone is here. I didn't respond. Renee and Miles had agreed to attend quietly. 2 plainclothes detectives had checked into the resort that morning. Everything was in motion. As guests drifted toward the ballroom for the reception, I walked slower than the rest. I wasn't here to destroy my sister's happiness. I was here to stop her from signing away the rest of her life. When I entered the ballroom, the tables were already set. Cream linens, crystal glasses, gold accents, and on every place setting, tucked neatly above each folded napkin, was a white envelope. From this moment on, nothing could be undone. The reception began like any other. Music floated softly through the room, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell, servers moved between tables with trays of champagne. Each guest had found their seat. Each seat had an envelope. I stood near the back of the ballroom, close enough to see the head table clearly. Callum entered, first arm extended behind him, guiding Maris forward as though he owned the path beneath her feet. He smiled at the crowd like a man who believed he had just secured his future. He looked relaxed, confident, certain. He thought he had crossed the last barrier. A toast began, Applause followed. The band played lightly in the background. Then it happened sooner than planned. At one of the center tables, an older woman frowned at the envelope in front of her and slid a finger under the flap. The sound of paper tearing was soft, but it carried. She unfolded the sheet inside. Her expression changed first. Then she stood. "Excuse me," she said, voice trembling. Across the room, I saw Renee Caldwell rise slowly from her seat. She held the printed summary in her hands. "My name is Renee Caldwell," she said, voice shaking but steady enough. "And this man used to go by a different last name when he promised to invest my savings." The room quieted instantly. Callum laughed once, forced and thin. "I'm sorry, I don't know what this is," he said, raising his hand slightly. Renee didn't sit down. She read aloud from the page. Dates amounts transferred copies of civil filings in Ohio. Before Callum could regain control of the narrative, another chair scraped back. Miles Ketter stood up from a table near the back. "He did the same thing to me," Miles said. "Different pitch, same disappearance." Guests began opening envelopes all at once now. The soft tear of paper turned into a ripple across the ballroom. The music stopped. The air changed. A woman near the bar stood abruptly. "I dealt with Blaine Mercer," she said. "She said she was his business partner. I wired funds to an account she controlled." Murmurs spread. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. Two men in suits rose calmly from separate tables. They stepped forward, badges visible. "We're with the North Carolina State Bureau," one said. "We've received documentation this morning regarding allegations of interstate financial fraud." Callum's face drained of color. "This is insane," he said quickly. "This is a setup. She's jealous. She's been trying to ruin this for months." He pointed at me. There it was, the pivot. I didn't move. Guests looked from him to me and back again. Callum stepped backward toward a side exit. One of the detectives blocked his path. "You're not under arrest at this moment," the detective said evenly, "but you are being detained for questioning." Callum's composure cracked. He turned sharply toward me. "You did this," he said through clenched teeth. "You're obsessed. You can't stand that she's happy." Maris stood frozen at the head table. Her eyes found mine. "When did you know?" she asked. Not accusing. Not yet. Just unsteady. This was the moment that mattered. If I reacted with anger, she would retreat toward him. If I lashed out, she would cling to the version of reality he offered. I walked forward, slowly stopping several feet away from her. "You told me yesterday," I said calmly, "that the perfect gift would be me disappearing from your life." Her breath caught. "I did what you asked," I continued. "I disappeared from the part of your life that was being used." The room was silent. "The Wilmington condo," I said gently. "It was never transferred. It stayed in my name." Callum's eyes flickered. "I sold it 2 days ago," I said. A murmur passed through the guests. "It can't be used as collateral. It can't secure a line of credit. It can't be leveraged after you merge accounts." Maris's face drained slowly. "You knew," she whispered. "I knew enough," I said. "Enough to remove what could trap you." Callum tried to interrupt, but the detective placed a firm hand on his arm. Maris looked at him, then back at me. The understanding didn't arrive all at once. It settled in pieces. The property she believed was her wedding gift. Gone. The financial plan built around it. Broken. She stood there in her white dress, every eye in the room fixed on her. I felt no triumph, no victory, only the weight of what had just been broken open. As Callum was escorted toward the exit, he kept talking, denying, accusing. But his voice no longer controlled the room. Maris remained standing in the center of it all, veil still pinned perfectly. Makeup untouched, life altered. I realized then that this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of consequences. And as the ballroom filled with whispers, I understood something else. The storm hadn't ended. It had only just arrived. The music had stopped. but the silence was louder. The ballroom at the Asheville resort no longer felt like a celebration space. It felt like a courtroom without walls. Guests stood scattered between tables, many still holding the white envelope's pages half folded in their hands. Champagne glasses sat untouched. A fork clattered somewhere near the back and echoed too sharply. Callum stood in the center of the dance floor, two detectives positioned on either side of him. His tuxedo was still immaculate. His boutonniere hadn't shifted, but his face had lost the composure he wore like armor. I watched him carefully. For years I had watched men like him in conference rooms, in negotiations, in boardrooms. The shift was always subtle at first. The smile held half a second too long. The eyes stopped calculating and started scanning for exits. He looked smaller now. Maris stood at the head table. Her bouquet had slipped from her hand and lay on the floor near her heels. The heavy satin of her gown made her movements slow, almost trapped inside her own silhouette. One of the detectives addressed him evenly. "We need you to come with us to answer some questions. There are multiple complaints filed across state lines." Callum tried to laugh. It came out brittle. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "It's my wedding. This is harassment." He pointed toward me again, voice sharpening. "She orchestrated this. She's unstable. She's been obsessed with interfering." He wanted the story to pivot back to me, to make me the problem. For most of my life, I would have stepped forward, explained, defended, smoothed things over. I didn't move. I stood still and let the words dissolve in the air. Renee stepped closer to one of the detectives, confirming she was willing to provide formal testimony. Miles nodded as well. They didn't look triumphant. They looked relieved. A resort manager hurried in from the side entrance, whispering urgently to someone near the stage. I caught fragments. "Local station already called. When guests posted videos. It's online." Of course it was. In 2026, nothing stays inside four walls. A moment like this becomes public before anyone has time to breathe. This was no longer a family crisis. It was a record. The detective nearest Maris turned gently toward her. "Ma'am, we'll need to ask you a few questions as well. There are documents listing you as a potential co-signer on a line of credit." Maris blinked. "A what?" He referenced the Wilmington property, the draft loan file, her signature on preliminary documents. She looked confused at first, then uncertain. "I signed some paperwork," she said slowly. "Callum said it was to streamline things. For our future." "Did you read the full terms?" the detective asked. Her silence answered. I felt something tighten inside my chest. This was the moment where I could step in and rescue her, but I didn't, because if I did, she would retreat into the version of reality where she had been blindsided and I had overstepped. Instead, I let her hear it from someone else. The detective continued. "The condo listed as collateral has already been sold. That file cannot proceed." Callum's head snapped toward me. "Sold." The word landed in the room like a dropped weight. Maris turned slowly in my direction. "You sold it?" she asked, voice barely audible. "Yes." "When 2 days ago?" The detective confirmed it. "The transfer was completed before today. There is no asset available under that address." Callum struggled against the composure he'd been clinging to. "You had no right," he muttered under his breath toward me. I met his gaze without flinching. I had every right. They guided him toward the exit. He kept talking as they walked. Accusations, denials, half-formed threats about lawsuits and defamation. But his words had lost gravity. As the ballroom doors closed behind him, a strange stillness settled over the room. Guests began gathering their belongings quietly. Some approached Maris, touching her arm gently. Others avoided eye contact altogether. She remained standing for a moment, then slowly lowered herself into a chair. The weight of the dress seemed unbearable now. I watched her from across the room. The distance between us felt deliberate. Eventually, a wedding planner approached me and said softly, "She's in the private suite. She asked for you." I followed her down the hallway. The same hallway where I had heard him whisper about accounts and signals. Inside the smaller room, Maris sat on a cushioned bench near the window. Her veil was still pinned. Her makeup had begun to smudge at the edges. She looked up when I entered. "You knew," she said. "It wasn't a question. I knew enough," I replied. "And you still let me walk down that aisle." There it was. The accusation I expected. I stepped closer, but didn't sit. If I had stopped the ceremony, I said quietly, "You would have defended him." She didn't answer. "You would have believed I was trying to sabotage you," I continued. "You needed to see it where it couldn't be dismissed." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "You let me marry him. I let you make your own decision," I said, "but I removed the trap." She looked down at her hands. "The condo," she whispered. "Yes. You sold it." "Yes." She swallowed hard. For years I thought that was the one thing that was finally mine. It was never about ownership, I said. It was about safety. Silence stretched between us. "I didn't read what I signed," she admitted finally. "He said it was for joint planning, for our future." "I know. You didn't trust him." "I trusted patterns," I said. She let out a long breath, shaky and uneven. For a second, I almost reached for her, but I stopped myself. If I stepped back into the role of rescuer, now nothing would change. "I'm not here to humiliate you," I said gently. "I'm here to make sure you're not tied to something that would take years to undo." Her eyes lifted to mine. "You granted my wish," she said faintly. "Yes." I nodded once. "I disappeared from the part of your life that was being used against you." When I left the room, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains. The lake reflected orange and pink, calm and indifferent. Maris remained seated in that suite, still in her wedding dress. And as I walked to my car, I knew nothing between us would ever be simple again. The story didn't stay contained. Within hours, short clips circulated online. Groom detained at reception. Blurred footage of detectives leading Callum out of the ballroom. Guests whispering. A glimpse of white satin in the background. By the next morning, local stations in North Carolina ran brief segments. It was framed as a financial investigation unfolding during a wedding reception. My face appeared only briefly in one clip, slightly out of focus, but clear enough that colleagues texted, "Are you okay? Is that your sister?" I didn't respond immediately. Callum's case expanded quickly. Civil complaints were reviewed together. Electronic transactions tied to accounts associated with Blaine Mercer were flagged. She was contacted by investigators. Subpoenas followed. The Wilmington Bank opened its own internal review of the draft loan file. The inquiry initiated by Callum was documented. Any preliminary credit discussions involving Maris were frozen pending investigation. For the first time since the engagement, there was pause. In the middle of it all, the wire transfer from the condo sale settled fully into my account. I stared at the number for a long time. I paid off the remainder of my student loans, cleared a small line of credit I'd been carrying out of convenience, transferred the rest into a high-yield savings account. Then I scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor. I wasn't preparing for war. I was preparing for stability. A week later, I sat in a therapist's office for the first time in my adult life. I told her about the accident when I was 17, about guardianship papers, about cooking dinner at 18 while my friends went to parties, about becoming the reliable one, the fixer, the one who absorbs impact so others don't have to. She asked me, "What happens when you stop fixing?" I didn't have an answer yet. Maris called the first night, then again the next morning, then 3 times in a row that afternoon. Sometimes she sounded angry. "You humiliated me," she said once. Other times she sounded small. "I don't know what to do." I let the calls go to voicemail. For the first time, I chose not to rush in. A month passed. One Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Maris stood on my porch. No makeup, no wedding dress, no performance, just jeans, a sweater, and a small tote bag in her hand. She looked older. She looked tired. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I had whispered that I would disappear. I didn't see it, she said after a long silence. He made everything sound logical. He said you didn't respect him, that you thought I couldn't handle my own life. I listened. He said you were jealous, she continued, that you didn't want me to have something of my own. I didn't interrupt. I signed things because I wanted to prove I trusted him, she admitted. I didn't read everything. I just wanted it to work. Her voice cracked slightly. And maybe, she added, I was jealous of you too. That caught me. You had your career, your independence. I felt like I gave up mine when I took you in. I loved you, but I resented it. And he knew that. I took a slow breath. I won't deny that you sacrificed things, I said, but I won't carry guilt for surviving. She nodded slowly. I know. I stood and retrieved one last envelope from my desk drawer. I placed it in front of her. Inside was a copy of the condo sale contract and a handwritten letter. She unfolded the letter first. In it, I had written that she did not owe me for guardianship, that I did not owe her for breathing, that love doesn't require debt. She finished reading and looked up. So where does that leave us, she asked. It leaves us honest, I said, and separate. I don't want to lose you. You're not losing me, I replied. You're losing the version of me that fixes everything. She swallowed. Can we start over? Starting over doesn't mean pretending nothing happened, I said gently. It means building differently. 6 months later, I moved into a townhouse in a quieter part of Charlotte. I joined a weekend hiking group in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I met new people who didn't know the story before they knew me. I began seeing someone from work named Aaron. It was slow, uncomplicated. No urgency, no hidden accounts. Maris started therapy as well. She found a job in a marketing firm downtown. We met for coffee occasionally. We didn't talk about money. We talked about boundaries, about choice, about how love without awareness can become dangerous. I didn't disappear from my family. I disappeared from the role that kept me small. The gift I gave wasn't destruction. It was truth. And truth, even when it fractures, something has a way of clearing the ground so something healthier can grow. Sometimes the hardest thing we do in life isn't fighting back, it's stepping back. We often believe love means staying, fixing, absorbing the damage so no one else has to. But tonight reminds us that love without boundaries can quietly turn into self-betrayal. And when truth finally surfaces, it doesn't have to come with revenge. It can come with clarity. What we saw wasn't the collapse of a family. It was the painful beginning of honesty. Maybe all of us in one way or another have played the role of the silent fixer. Maybe we've mistaken endurance for loyalty. But growth rarely feels gentle. It asks us to choose dignity over comfort, truth over appearance, and compassion without losing ourselves. And that choice, even when it shakes everything, can be the first real act of love. If this story stayed with you, if it stirred something familiar, you're welcome to leave a few lines below and share what resonated. And if you'd like to be part of a space where we keep listening to stories like this, quietly, thoughtfully, consider subscribing. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care of your heart, and we'll see you soon.